Welcome, everybody. Second Compliance Tuesday talk. Very, very chuffed, as they would say, to do this together with Professor O'Connor, Neale O'Connor. Neale, we know each other for about 10 years, probably.
Correct.
We've been around in various sessions of global sources, seminars in Hong Kong trade shows, and ran into each other on other events. Thank you so much for joining us and being willing to share a little bit of what other people learn from you in 4 years, probably, in many sessions. Can you just kick off and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for joining this wonderful morning in Europe. I want to just share with you my past, and very briefly, I grew up on a farm. I actually tell industry folk, I grew up on a farm. I love making things, and I write academic papers that no one reads. So I'm very practically minded, and that really drove me to visit literally hundreds of factories in China in the last 6 to 8 years. And I just don't visit the factories. I actually took a video camera with me, and I've videoed over 40 factories, assembly operations in China, end to end. And on some of those assignments were actually audits I was doing for clients in the USA. So I've had experience. You may call me a professor, but I've actually had in real world experience in actually undertaking factory audits and judging on product quality. So all
boots on the ground.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. In the trenches.
Yes. So
And
very excited about
have you seen a change in what's happening in the trenches in the last years?
The big change came probably late 2018, especially with the tariffs that came on board, and a lot of the factories I was visiting, they're in additional negotiations with their clients because the clients were saying, hey, you need to share some of these tariffs we have to pay when we go into the US. And so depending on whether the supplier was big or small, a lot of the suppliers were actually wearing a portion of the margin. And the FOB price, they had to compromise a lot, and some suppliers just went out of business because of that. Yeah.
Every change is an argument to discuss price.
True. And, the last thing you really should do when you're negotiating with suppliers is talk about price, because if you talk about price, then the supplier will say, sure, we'll give you the price you want, but they won't tell you that they're secretly outsourcing. They won't tell you they're getting cheaper materials and all the other things that you cannot see.
Yeah, so you renegotiate the price and you renegotiated the product that you got, but the last part you tend to forget. One of the things that I actually wrote about 2 months ago when we first set up the idea for this session, and I wrote it yesterday. There's, of course, if you look at retail and trade, the experience in the market is there, and you need to build up experience. You need to know the lingo. When you start being in retail and trade, you don't know what is FOB and what is CIF and 20 with those dashes. What is it? Oh, it's a container. Okay. And HQ means high cube, and okay, and an LC. Yeah. So it's lingo as well. So you in the guy with the one eye conquers the blinds. So you think you can rely on what you know, but sometimes a gut feeling is disturbed by the salmonella chicken that you had yesterday. The thing with what we're going to talk about today is data. And data, you might not like it, but when collected properly, it gives you a benchmark that is independent of the chicken you had yesterday.
Absolutely.
So looking at what's happening in the world per se, you cannot even travel lightly, going visiting a factory and doing an audit. It's difficult to visualize the benchmark that you did before as a buyer, and you go in and then, okay, this one looked crappy and that one looked clean. One thing that you always can arrange and is collecting data. And you had an interesting quote the other day about the relationship. You remember which one?
Connecting the dots was one quote I had.
Having a better relationship, more important to have a relationship.
Absolutely. One big takeaway for the audience today is that when the borders are closed, you really got to focus on the relationship with your third-party auditor, with that third-party auditors doing a factory audit or the product audit. You really need to understand who is that auditor going into your factory. Because in the past, pre-COVID, you should visit the factory anyway. You should take the time to get to know the supplier, but you can't do that from a distance. So get to know the third-party auditor. There's no border closures to stop you from getting to know the third-party auditor. And in most cases, the third-party auditor or the brand that is managing the auditors, they have people in all offices in major cities in Europe, and you can talk to them. You're paying their money. You're their customer. Don't just see your work with the auditor as a transaction. It should be a relationship.
I see. It's like a little bit, you are not the customer of the doctor that is treating you. First of all, you're a customer of the insurance company. And if you're not happy with the doctor, you can discuss with the doctor. But if your feedback is not good, ultimo, who's getting paid by who? So that is what you said before. It's in these days, it's a relationship with the vendor is very important, but your auditor is a very important vendor as well. So perhaps a little bit give that a little bit more priority.
Well, if we're talking about China, which I'm most experienced with, they're your eyes and ears on the ground now because borders are closed. So,
So let's dive a little bit deeper into audits and inspections, because you have done a lot of research work, and tell us a little bit about how that went and what the outcomes were.
I got two big lots of data, and I'm going to show you some visual descriptions of the data, which will be wonderful for the audience. But before I do that, the two big lots of data. The one big lot of data is I've had access to the supplier blacklist. Now, the audience can go seek that out, www.supplierblacklist.com. You can go to there now and actually see the complaints by buyers of suppliers in all over the world. These are not just complaints of suppliers in China. And so I was able to get the back-end data of that website because I worked with the founder of that website, and so they shared the data with me, and for the anonymized, of course. And I just want to understand what are the characteristics of the engagement that predicts the likelihood that you will be scammed as a buyer. And I'll just share my screen briefly once you enable me to share. And there are basically four characteristics, and that is verifying the business, visiting the factory, having a contract, and FOB. Now, verifying the business, generally, you should make sure that you have a lawyer on the ground. They're very reasonably cheap in China. For a couple $100, you can verify that a supplier's company really is the real deal. Visiting factories, okay. Border closures, you cannot do that. But that's why I said develop a relationship with your third-party inspector. Contract, okay. You must have a contract, but a contract won't save you. That's another thing I tell my clients. Don't have a contract for the point of view of seeking damages if something goes wrong, because that's not going to happen when you're working with suppliers in developing economies, unless you have a huge team of lawyers and resources that you want to go down that road. Yes, that's possible, but that's going to cost you more than what it's worth.
Yeah, it's an uneven fight, unequal fight. Yeah.
A basic contract just really sets out, here's our basic agreement. And, we know each other, Mr. Supplier, you're supplying this is when we want it delivered. But the contract really just sets out, the dates, the expectations of both parties, and it's kind of, we try and formalize the agreement. So it's not about perfecting the agreement, but we're just trying to make it as formal as possible. And finally, FOB. This is really interesting. FOB, free on board. You talked about terminology.
Right.
Okay. Often I'll give you a real story. So as my global supply chain management students is a Master of International Business I teach in, their first big assignment is they have to get a request for quotation. And in addition to that, they have to get a freight forwarder quotation. And half the students came back to me and said, oh, this is so easy. I said, what do you mean? Oh, because the supplier gave us the freight forwarder quotation for us. We didn't have to do the second step. I said, yeah, suppliers will do that. And then you lose visibility, you lose control over how much are you paying for the freight forwarding part and how much are you paying for your product part. And okay, if the supplier is organizing all this, how can you get the auditor in between that process? So you get your products quality tested before they put onto the ship, you know, because so this is the FOB meaning that you take control over the visibility of your product in the port of China before it's shipped to your market, right? But often a supplier will say, oh, no, Mr. Buyer, don't worry. We'll look after the freight forwarding. Where do you want to, we'll send it to
Cost insurance of freight.
Yeah, we'll send it to Paris, we'll send it to UK, we'll send it to Germany, wherever you like. And you'll think, wow, I didn't know that suppliers were so nice like this. No, don't fall for that trap. So there are 4 things to make sure that, you know, you have got the right supplier. And so that the data, I won't bore you with all the data on that, but I just want to show you that my data actually supports, if you do get those 4 things working, then things do work. And so that's the first part 1 here, that verifying the business, visiting the factory, the contract, and making sure you focus on FOB. So you got the visibility before the stuff goes onto the ship. Now, the most interesting part of the data, and just butt in if I'm talking too much here, is I've been able to get access to literally hundreds of factory audits that we matched with product audits, over 380 matched factory and product audits. And to understand if a factory audit outcome is high, does that lead to a better product audit outcome? Why would you say that? Well, when I worked with my third-party friend in Hong Kong, I said, how many product audits have you done in the last decade? And they said, over 10,000. I said, how many exactly? He's doing 12,500 product audits. So, okay, great, good business. So out of that 12,500, how many factory audits have your clients asked for? And he said, just over 500. So that's a 1 to 25 difference. Right. That in some ways, that's a signal that buyers think, well, we don't need to do a factory audit. You know, I trust the supplier. Let's just focus on the product audit. Right. But what my data is showing you is that if you had 2 suppliers you want to choose from, I'm saying is press the button, you spend $300 to do a factory audit on each to find out which one has a better factory audit outcome. And my data is telling you that that better outcome supplier, that factory, will give you a much better outcome on the product audit. Wow. Neale, is that so? You know, it's really good in theory, but what does the data show? Well, if I just show you the data here, it's there's the factory audit data, and we've got over 500 factory audits represented here. So what is the range for a factory audit? 0 to 100. So what's the lowest? We're talking about 30. What's the highest? About 92. All right, great. Okay, that's good on its own. But what we did was matched the product audits with these exact factories. So we matched samples here. And so when we look at those factories, they're across the whole gamut in industry: household, industrial, electronics, clothing, sports, outdoor, you name it, everything you want to bring into the market, into the EU. What do these product audits look like? Well, a product audit is something like where we're going to, if I'm just looking over here, and some of the audience knows that ultimately the final decision is whether it pass, fail, or hold. All right, this one failed. Why did it fail? Because there were 17 minor defects found, and the tolerance for the AQL level of 2 was 7. And so therefore they failed it. All right. Even though there were other parts that passed. All right. So just want to say that's a typical outcome of a product audit where you pass, fail, hold. All right. So what I'm going to show you is how the factory audits, the high and low factory audits, relate to the major defects, minor defects, the judgment of that, and finally the final judgment. So if we look at the audit data, and we're talking, this is the matched audit data for those factories, the 368 audits, 38% of them failed. All right. So the final judgment was failure. So that's a subjective judgment. We're not talking about defects here. All right. It's an overall. Is there an overall pass? All right. Great. All right. Now that overall is based on production status, which 65% passed, export packing, 31% passed, inner packing, 52% passed, and product design, 17% pass. Okay. All right. So that's one outcome.
72% hold on product design test. Wow.
Yeah. So hold means going back to the audience, going back to the buyer.
That means delay. That's also delay in cost.
Totally. Right. Because the buyers need to make, the next conversation is, well, how much of the shipment should we be concerned about? And the auditor will probably say, well, if I extrapolate the sample we use, there might be 5% of your total shipment compromise.
Or when it's Christmas decoration, try to delay Christmas a couple of weeks.
You can't do that. No. All right. So let's go to the judgment on the defects. Remember, there's the actual defects, and then the auditor will make a judgment for the buyer. All right. So that's in totality. And many of the audience, the AQL, will come back to looking at the AQL standards if you want to have that discussion. But basically, when we're looking at major and minor, we want to go through these tables to find out what the size sample is, what the AQL level audit is, and that will tell you the standards for a major defect and a minor defect. Right, great. All right. So, and that's from those AQL tables, that's where the maximum tolerance comes from. So you got 5 here and you got 7 here. That comes from the tables. And then the auditor compares how many they found with the tables, and then that will come out with a fail or hold or pass. All right. So let's have a look at overall. We've got major defects, 85% intolerance, and minor defects, 75% within tolerance. And I think a point we want to make now is that, and we can come back to this later, we're talking about tolerances that are very, very generous, Caspar. For a minor defect, that audit report I showed you earlier, they're saying, oh, it's okay if you have 5 major defects. It's okay if you have 17 minor.
Out of 80 samples.
80, yeah.
And they only made 500.
Yeah. So, there's 5 major out of 80. So that could be 25 or 30 major defects in the whole order quantity, right? So, exactly. And so a third-party inspector could come back to you and say, oh, the audit passed, even though there are 5 major defects found. So be aware that an audit is not giving you using the AQL limits, the auditor is not giving you 100% perfect clean bill of health over that product shipment.
Plus, Neil, if a product has 3 minors, it only counts as 1 minor.
Yep.
So
yeah. So, and this is extrapolating, not too much data here, Caspar, but here, if we look at that data, here are the number of major defects found across the audit reports. So in 27 of the audit reports, they had 1 to 3 over, this is over the tolerance.
Yeah.
7 reports, they had 3 to 6. 9 reports had 6 to 8 over the tolerance.
Right.
And this is major defects. Like you wouldn't even want to ship.
6 to 8 over The AQL limit.
There were 9 audit reports where there was 6 to 8 over.
Okay, got it.
And the same on the minor. Look, it's a long tail, so it's not like you're just one over. There's factories out there that are giving you stuff that is way over the tolerance. And as we just agreed 60 seconds ago, these tolerances are very, very generous, right? All right. So I think the big thing we want to show the audience is, okay, great. If we look at the good factory audits versus the bad factory audits.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
what did the audit results look like? Well, so what I did is split at the mean. So anything greater than 69 out of 100, we say as a good factory audit. Anything less than 69 was a bad factory audit. All right, great. Okay, so if we look at the good overall, 30% failed. All right, if we look at the bad factory audit, 47% failed. So that's the overall judgment. All right, great. Now, there are 4 subcomponents of that overall, and that is production status. And you can see that you got 74 passed for the good factory audit, and you got 57 passed for the bad. Like, these are statistically so different that you want to pay attention to the factory audit. So let's have a look at another sub part. Export packing. Okay, 34% passed for the good, 28% passed for the bad. Okay, maybe not much difference there. All right, inner packing. So we're talking very similar on the inner packing. All right, if we look at product design, you've got very similar there. So basically on the product. Now let's go to the defect judgment. You can see that for the good factory audit, we have 75% pass. That's the judgment, the overall judgment of the defects. Right. For the bad factory audit, 48%. Like, this is just night and day between the good and bad factory audit outcomes with regard to the product audit outcomes. Major defects. All right. 92% intolerance, within tolerance for the good factory audit, 78%, and 78% for the bad. And again, a big statistically different. And for the minor defects, again, 83% versus 66%. So these numbers are just huge. You know, the message is spend the money for a factory audit, because the factory audit is like the canary in the coal mine. It gives you advanced surveillance warning of, okay, what is the likelihood of you getting your products within tolerance if you pull the trigger and ask that supplier to make your order? Let me just pause for a minute, and back to you, Caspar.
So this is, I like the canary in the coal mine analogy. So this is actually, how to say, the return on investment of those audits, it's obvious. You know, you will get paid back in reliability and reduced cost of poor quality very quickly. And we discussed it earlier, and this is in this brief example that you showed. Many of those retail trades also use 2.5 and 4 as for major and minors when doing AQL, which actually should be far more stringent when you when you are doing electronics or toys. You should move to a 0.5 and 1, or 1 and 2.5, because
just
to be honest,
Caspar, what you for the audience, just what you're saying there is, so for example, if you have a sample of 200 at the L level, generally we would focus on, you know, if we're down here for a major defect, then 10 out of 200 is okay, that's acceptable. But what you're saying, Caspar, is maybe 2 or 3 is acceptable.
Exactly.
Not 10.
Exactly. So, and it's also if I am importing products and I have a retail customer who is going to measure my performance, I need also to negotiate with how they are going to judge me, what is relevant, because ultimo they will be confronted with, in the old days, consumers that bring back a product to the store. In the new days, consumers that complain on TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. So, you know, the damage is done. If you didn't check what's happening with your brand or that of your retailer when you do private label, the damage is done, because major means the defect is such that a end user will bring back the product.
Yeah, but
major means the end user think that the promise made for the brand and the value he paid, that is out of balance.
Yep, absolutely.
And if you notice that consumers are bringing back products for minors, then these should become majors. You know, because the market is changing, the perception, especially now in these days when people are getting more conscious about spending money, they will become more critical. They want value for money. The proposition of value for money changes in society. It changes because you know, if you are Apple, you pay dearly. I always use the example in my trainings. You could buy a Gillette, a jacket somewhere from a factory that makes it for Primark, but also makes it for Hugo Boss. Because making a jacket, making this piece of apparel is a kind of skill. And if I pay like €5 or €10 because it's just for carnival, and you know, I don't mind when the buttons go off after 2 days, I just throw it away. But if it's a Hugo Boss jacket and I paid 400, I want it to last, because I take it on my business trip and I crumble it in my suitcase and I get it out and it doesn't wrinkle, and oh damn, there was a button off. What the heck? This is the only jacket that I took. So what is a major or a minor? In some cases, people even don't know. They rely on testing, inspection, and certification companies to come up with a list, but they don't know what is brand value at your end. You know what brand value is, but they don't understand your brand value.
And to your point, Caspar, I've been in a factory where they actually make gifts and concessions, and they don't care about quality, because it doesn't matter if you get something for free and there's something wrong with it, you're not going to complain. You're not going to make a big deal about it. And a big difference. And so there are suppliers that are in the business of just making these throwaway items.
Right.
They're making big money out of that. So
it's interesting. There are suppliers that are not in the business of making throwaway items, and they still make throwaway items.
Well, sometimes the buyers don't know. But to your point, like, I'm an accountant, and I just want to, we can do the quick calculations with the audience. Like, why would you do a factory audit if you've already chosen a supplier? The answer is, it's not that simple. You actually go one step back earlier in the process, where you've got 3 potential suppliers you want to choose from. Then you'll do 3 factory audits, and then you choose the one with the better audit outcome. That's where you get the value of this data. If you've already chosen a supplier, well, okay, then good luck. But then you're going to come back to me, Caspar, and say, but Neale, why should I spend $300 times three when I can just pick one? $900, right? And I'm saying, well, if you're going to order 5,000 units from that supplier in each of the next quarters, that's 20,000 units. So basically that's 20,000, that's 1,000 divided by 20,000. So that's only 20 cents, $2. How much is that? 1,000 divided by 20. That's, I'm an accountant. All right. That's, 5 cents a unit. Right. To make sure you've got the best out of those 3 suppliers. And I think buyers are not doing that. They'll filter it down to the best 3 suppliers, but they won't pull the trigger in getting a factory audit done on each of those 3. They will make a judgment. Oh, I think this is the best one. And then, then why do I need to do a factory audit? Just pull the trigger and just order. Yeah. It is,
when you go fine dining and you walk into a toilet and you think, I shouldn't do fine dining here. There is something called trickle down effect, which is a popular word. But I've been working in the trenches in China since 95, 96. And this was the time when we had cold showers on the balcony of an unfinished dormitory in Dongguan. And why was there cold water? Because the power plant wasn't finished. So we had water, but no electricity. But the thing is, when we started to look into vendors and do audits, some of my engineering colleagues straight went into the engineering department and they chit chat, and then they had a lab and they had a lot of test equipment which was never used. I always asked, where's your calibration document? And they didn't have it. So I don't need to look at a lab. If you don't have a calibration document, why you have a lab? You don't know that a kilo is a kilo and a meter is a meter, then don't need to measure. And I was just always walking around the factory and I saw tiles from the walls and I saw sockets hanging out and I saw lamps not fixed. And that means that this factory is not paying attention. And you can say, yeah, but this is irrelevant. It's not. It's incredibly difficult to get yourself organized and stay organized. But the effect is that you will become organized. And I remember also when we started to supply GE, that they made us go voluntarily, paid by them, through Six Sigma programs, very basic, but because they said the things that you are going to save as waste on my products, because Neil, you can make 1,000, but you can make 2,000 to sort out 1,000. Then you have still 1,000 very good ones. And if you agree on the price of the 1,000, you're okay. But GE wasn't like that, because they said, if you need to make 2,000 to get 1,000 for me on this order, you're probably doing it for everything you make.
Yeah.
So the waste you make for me is in the same structure of everything you make. And I'm buying some cheap and cheerful items, but you also make expensive items, and I'm paying the cost for everything you do wrong. So the thing is, you are looking at the AQL of this guy's order, but they are making this for many, many other customers, and you're paying all. So my point is that price can go down way, because they're wasting time and money and resources. So if you get negative chaos from your order, remember, your order is just one of all they make. And one of the things why we touched the item for data at all was, if you have a supplier that is not disciplined and not organized, they're very unlikely to be able to tell you timely what they have done. And Neil and I, we just looked at one of the examples, and I explained to Neil, there is a new law coming as a follow-up of the EU timber regulation. And the original timber regulation is meant to prevent people in Europe buying certain wooden products that came from unsustainable forestry. So you need to be proven that this wood comes from sustainable forestry. And we do a good job, but not good enough. So the next legislation, and it's written, it's signed, not signed off, but it will be signed off and then probably come into place in 2 years. It's called the EU Deforestation Act. And it will go much further, because now you need to acknowledge your due diligence before shipment. Then you get a number. This number will be on the shipping documents. Okay, so now my process is changing. And what kind of due diligence do I need to do? I need to not know from which country these trees come. Remember, if you have MDF, this is a mix of trees. So know which consignment this would come from. And Europe will provide satellite images of areas in the world, and they will provide data allowing you to check if trees really are from this data or not, because I can measure my hair, and there is some kind of spore elements in there proving that I've been raised where I've been raised. And these kind of tests are becoming cheap and cheerful, fast and accurate enough to determine if the promise of the supply chain is correct. So Neil, I have a guy that makes chairs very cheap and cheerful, and I didn't do a factory audit. So now I even do an AQL inspection, and it's actually, it's not bad. The product is not bad, but the data of that product is bad. So we need even to envision that the scope of what we are going to audit is not just product, it's also has to become process.
Exactly. So you're going to have, partial process audits,
right.
Not just at the final shipment audit. Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So some people are happy that they get a bit of material from a supplier, but if that bit of material has no date and no document number and it's not signed off, it's no information, it's just data.
Yes.
And they have listed all the parts on it. There's no drawing. And they claim they have made everything. They made the metal, and they've made plastic, and they've made paint. But that is not data. And also, if you look at the chemical legislation, it is impossible in the future to test if there's any chemical substance in a product that is not allowed. you should have a supplier that can tell you what is in there. So we discussed it previously. You are looking at first tier data. So imagine if you forget to do the important step, what you say, check if that intrinsic value of that supplier, if the core of the organization is there. Remember, if they are not good themselves, how can they audit themselves, their vendors? Because it's even worse.
It gets back to, the more price pressure they're under, they're just going to take shortcuts. I remember one supplier made Bluetooth.
No, they don't do that.
Made Bluetooth speakers, and I said, part of the reason why they were failing, they had rejects at the end of the assembly line, and 70% of these speakers were shippable. I said, part of the reason was that they had problem of the components coming in, they weren't working. Materials inspection, they weren't doing any. I talked to the owner, you should have material inspection going in so you don't waste putting in dud components during the assembly process.
Right.
And the owner said, look, it's only $4 FOB. Why would I waste time on material inspections? So, that's the owner mindset. And that's something that, these are all the things that you'll pick up when you visit the factory. 2022, you really can't visit the factory like you could 3 years ago. All right. So spend more time with a third-party auditor and have that conversation about all the different things that the auditor should be checking, or get the auditor to teach you as the buyer, what should we be looking for with power bank, 10,000 milliamp hour power bank? Mr. Auditor, you should weigh the power bank. No, you should do more than that, because there was a supplier that filled up a whole shipment of 10,000 milliamp hour power banks with 5,000 milliamp hour cell inside, and they epoxied sand for the rest of the cavity. So the weight of the power banks was the same as a 10,000 milliamp hour power bank. Right. So, the auditor wasn't told or didn't know enough to actually test some of these units for the actual milliamp hour charge that is coming out.
But at least the factory charged them the same money.
They did. And they didn't find out until it was back in the US, and the customers started complaining, like, there's these 10,000 milliamp hour power banks, they just drain too fast.
Can you imagine if they put real sand in there, soil with bugs? Can you imagine that you have to have a recall on power banks because you imported bugs?
That's possible. That's possible.
It's possible. Neale, let's go back one step, because you mentioned something about connecting dots.
Connecting dots. Well, I think that's the big thing for the data. Like, first of all, if you can verify the supplier so you're not scammed. Okay, right. Most of the audience have probably been there and they know how to do that. Okay, so those 4 areas, verifying, the actual visit by third party, contract and FOB, fine. All right. But so you got a supplier, but connecting the dots is connecting the dots between the outcome of the factory audit with the product audit. And so what my data is showing statistically, and we've run many, many models, the data is conclusive evidence that a better factory audit leads to a much better product audit outcome. And Great. Then we went one step further and said, well, is there some cases where this is very stronger or weaker? And is there another variable that we could look for the audience? And
something.
Well, no, another variable is whether the supplier already has a relationship with a OEM customer from a major developed country.
Okay. Yep.
And if they have that, then the association between the factory audit outcome, the product audit outcome is even stronger. And you could say that customer could be driving both. Well, then, so be it. We're not here to argue with the other statistics, wrong or right. What's the causality? That's a signal to ask the supplier, do you have any major customers that we could get reference from? Or, we have an OEM customer from Japan or Taiwan or US or Europe, from Germany or France. Right. And maybe it's not in the market you're importing to. So therefore, it's not a competitive question of getting competitive data from the supplier. And, and so these are signals that you can get even if you're not going to do the factory audit, because we find that and I've been to the factories where they've actually are producing for an OEM from Japan, and they're a hell of a lot much more cleaner. Everything's in place. All of the quality control sheets are there compared to those that are not. There's a big difference. So, these are little shortcuts that you can take, even if you don't do the factory audit. But what we're saying is do both. All right. Look for the good customer that they already have a relationship with, because obviously if they've been able to become an approved supplier for a major brand name in a major developed economy, then they must be doing something right. So why can't you piggyback on that? Like the little fish piggyback on the back of a shark.
Sure. And actually you can even, these days, there's different tools. There are different companies like Import Yeti that look into a bit of loadings from goods that ship to America. So you can actually verify, you look to that supplier. Did they actually ship? Is it true what they say? And often, European companies, they say, but that is America. But if you supply goods like electronics to America, you need to use UL registered components, UL registered PCBs, UL registered connectors, UL registered, even a registered printer with registered labels. So if a company is really doing that, how come they cannot do that for you? If they used to work in a structured way, why they don't do it for you? And so one of the things that I do in my training is that you need to look at these things not from a consumer perspective, from a business perspective. You need to have an opinion about answers you get and also answers that you don't get, because some of these answers just simply don't make sense.
That UL certification will kill your business. I had one client come to me and he imported power boards through Amazon into US. I think he sold 7,000 of them, and he got a cease and desist and recall letter from UL because the factory that made those power boards had a fake UL certification.
Exactly.
And he had to do a recall. And he's just an Amazon seller. He had to contact 7,000 customers individually.
And this is not the recall from authorities. This is private company misusing brands. This can happen with piggyback riding on TÜV Rheinland approvals or VDE approvals or NEMCO approvals, whatever. If you're not a licensee, Neil, we had one question in the chat about somebody saying, okay, does it mean that I can slide into, let's say, higher AQL values, let's say from 1 to 2.5 and 1.5 to 4 when the supply is better? And I said, no. The AQL numbers belong to certain risk categories for certain products. If the supplier is getting better, you move to another part of the table and you do a reduced lot. And even if they deserved it, if like five shipments are okay, you move to a skip lot table. So AQL is based on the principle that you always do inspections. And the AQL principle itself holds systems integrated in that allows you to reduce the effort.
Yeah,
I have a mistake, you go back to a previous level. So you earn a reduced level. You earn a better supplier has less cost for you. Yeah.
Once you get that.
One more thing, because many people say, I take the cost of the product failures in my sales price. But then they don't monitor majors and minors at all, and they never look at social media. But they forget that the biggest cost is delay.
Yeah.
And you missed the season, you missed your advertising window, you missed a trade show where you want to hand out the products, or you handed out the products and everybody came home and they unpacked it and your whatever fruit dish was all rusted and it wasn't cotton steel. So the thing is, the buyer will say, we just calculated in the cost, but the buyer is never punished because they never got that data. Yeah, if you never looked at that data, then they better trust your data.
I've been to the factory that got the first UL certification for the hoverboard back in 2016, 17. And not far from that factory was another, I call it a workshop, making nearly identical hoverboards.
Almost.
And I said to them, oh, do you care that you don't have UL certification? Say, no, we're shipping our 600 units to France, so we don't care about the US market. And so there's always going to be other markets out there that rather than suppliers being forced to improve, they're just searching for
the way of
regulated markets,
the way of least resistance.
Exactly. So,
Daddy, can I get an ice cream? Did you ask Mom? No, not really. Yes, I did, but actually she said no.
Yeah. So keep in mind that, suppliers, not all suppliers are going to do the professional route of, okay, I'm making this product, I should have certification.
But there's plenty of suppliers.
Yep. And factory audit, 3 of them. Good.
Okay. From my end,
questions?
No questions. And I know there's something that I cannot see because it was blurred, because I know you have some life philosophies on your back wall that perhaps is a good last message to the audience before we say bye-bye.
No, there you go. All right. My last.
I thought it was his bank account statement, but it wasn't.
No. This one here says be a solution-focused person.
Good. Yeah.
All right. So that's the first one, and you can see that. Oh, that's clearer now. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And the other one is saying be a good colleague. All right. Number 1, self-awareness. Number 2, humility. Number 3, empathetic with colleagues. And number 4, listen to understand. So that's what I try to do every day. So there you go.
I listen to understand. We all listen to understand. And thank you very much for sharing this. We will follow up so that people that were not able to attend today, is like a major holiday in Germany, for example, can have a glance at it, and probably will add some of the slides that you have as data.
Happy to share.
We'll point. I know you have a tremendous amount of followers on LinkedIn already. I'm very jealous. It doesn't bring any value, but it shows that you have built up a good audience, and they're not all students, but there are a lot of students. But those students become colleagues somewhere.
Yes, they will.
And so, Neale, pretty chuffed that you get some time in your busy schedule to hang out with us for 45 minutes.
If your audience want to check out some of the, as I said, I did video factories. If you go to my YouTube, Tech Asia, TECH space Asia, Tech Asia, you will see the actual factory walkthroughs, and it can't help. Maybe there's one of your audience, you're on a procurement team, you're onboarding a new person that doesn't know much about procurement. Get them to watch some of these videos to see what real suppliers look like.
Great tip. We'll be sure that in the summary information that we'll put all the right links so that they can find it. I say bye-bye to you. Have a great dinner.
Thank you.
Evening, and touch base, perhaps in real life in Hong Kong somewhere in the nearby future. And,
happy to help, Caspar. Cheers for now. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.